In this video, we're going to break down everything that you need to know about the static postural assessment. Not only what to look for when you're actually going about to take your exam, but also what to do within the gym. So grab your paper and pen, let's go to school. Joe Drake with the Axiom Fitness Academy, and we have my lovely model, Jess, who's actually an Axiom Fitness Academy graduate, so everything we're going to be talking about, she knows inside and out. Yep. When it comes to static postural assessment, this is one that, like many of the assessments, we learn about when you're first getting certified, you're going to take your guys' NASM exam, and then a lot of trainers don't end up using it afterwards. And I think part of it is because no one really talks about how do we use it, like how does it actually fit into the gym. So let's talk about the theory versus practical world and actually working with clients. The theory behind us doing a static postural assessment is that no matter what, when we get in, we start doing moves in the gym, we start doing squats, whatever exercises we're doing, your body always needs a base, right? This postural base in which to accept forces. So the idea is that if we can get a sense of how someone might hold their body all day long, right, when they first come through the door, while we're having conversation, and then during a more formal postural assessment, then it can give us some indication, all right? And I say indication because it doesn't necessarily mean anything on its own. The static postural assessment is going to be the most valuable when you use it in conjunction with the overhead squat, with the single leg squat, the push-pull, and we find things that show up on both places, all right? So it can be a great way to just get an idea of like, hey, what am I working with? All right, now the practical, the real world side of this is that for a lot of individuals, it's kind of awkward just to stand there and have somebody look at you, maybe even take some notes. So my pro tip for you guys as we go through all of this is think about how you might use this in the gym. And there is the doing assessment in the moment side of things, and then there's my preference, which is actually taking photos and utilizing images, which can be much more natural in the moment and actually can be a really cool teaching tool with clients when you guys get into talking about what these things all mean. But let's jump into your guys' optimal setup. So right here, you guys can see, first off, you gotta have a wonderful potential client like I do here with Jess. And then in a perfect world, right, and you may not be in a gym that has an easy setup with, an empty wall, and that's okay. You can still get a lot out of this information. But in a perfect world, you'd wanna have an empty wall where we can get a sense and a frame of reference of body and position. And you guys can see on our wall here, we actually even have some lines to give us a sense of what might be level. Now in the textbook, you guys will find, postural grids, where maybe if you're in a physical therapy office, you might have access to someone standing against a wall with all these grid lines. I truthfully have never been in a gym where I've had access to that, all right? So I'm gonna imagine many of you might not as well. So we're gonna try to talk about it without all of those things. Now, as we do it, first off, you can see Jess has no shoes on. Looks like she might be wearing the same socks on both feet, but that's okay. But she has no shoes on, and the benefit for us is that we get a sense of what's going on directly with the feet, as a lot of our shoes tend to hide what's going on, okay? So you'll find that in most of our assessments. Generally, we wanna go with shoes off. Not that we can't get a lot of other information, but that's the best place to start. Outside of that, even as you guys are talking with potential clients, now, your client may come in, whether it's an assessment or it's someone you already know, they might come in and you might not have any control of what they wear, but you will get the best information if they're wearing some sort of form-fitting athletic clothes. Because as we start looking at different areas of the body and we go through our checkpoints, we want to have some visual recognition of those. So it's not like you can't do it if it's not the perfect outfit for the gym, but that will help. All right, so as we jump in, there are 5 major checkpoints that we want to look for no matter what position, because we're going to take a look, as Jess is standing here right now, from the anterior view. We're going to look at the lateral and the posterior view. In each of these, and with all of our assessments, there's 5 major checkpoints that we're looking for. So first off, just stand how you would normally stand, okay? Now, that alone is somewhat challenging for people because Jess knows right now, she knows she's smart, she knows she's being assessed. Okay, so there is always this battle of like, are you getting real information or do you say assessment and all of a sudden we pull ourselves in the perfect spot? It is what it is, right? So we're gonna go ahead and go with it and see what we find. The first area of the body we're gonna look at is the foot and the ankle, right? That's our first checkpoint. Then we're gonna take a look and see what's going on with the knees. And then we'll take a look at what we call our LPHC, this lumbopelvic hip complex. As you can see right here with our female pelvis, all the muscles that attach to this portion of the body. From there, we'll move up to what's going on at our shoulder complex. This also includes like kind of our thoracic spine. And then last but not least, especially from the lateral view, we'll see what's going on with the head and the neck. So the first place we want to start is from an anterior view. So as you guys are coaching your client to set up just have them set up in a comfortable position. Again, in an ideal world, against a wall where you've got some frame of reference, but try not to overcoach them. Just tell them stand how they would normally stand, because that's where the best information is going to come from, is what kind of positions are they in all day long. And then from there, all you really have to do is start with your 5 major checkpoints. Now, just a reminder, as we go through some of the checkpoints and what we may or may not see from the anterior view, nothing automatically means that anyone's broken, all right, or that she's not going to be able to exercise. Really what we're looking for is we're looking for, first off, big asymmetries, especially from this anterior view. Are there any major differences from the left and right side of the body, especially in the sense that might relate to an injury that she's told me about, or maybe some exercises that I may need to modify or work around, okay? That's all we're getting is information. And the idea of doing this before we go into our overhead squat or single leg squat or push-pull is we'll be able to kind of triangulate some of this information and just make better coaching decisions. So first place we're going to start from this anterior view is taking a look at the front side. And especially if we look straight on, right? If you guys have a good view there from the camera, looking right on, in a perfect world, there'd be this straight line going directly down through her head, through the center of her hips, and equidistant in between her feet, okay? Now, you're probably not going to be in a place where you have a plumb line and you're hanging a string from the ceiling, but just for you to visualize, because that's going to give you the idea of, are there asymmetries left to right side? And if we start from the ground, first thing we can take a look at is what's going on at the feet, all right? Where are her toes pointed? And you can see, because Jess is smart, she knows she's being assessed anyways, but we're going to uncover some things, don't you worry, is that her feet are relatively straightforward, right? You know what I mean? What we might look for, things that might be kind of what we call gross abnormalities, was let's say Jess's right foot was turned way out to the side, but the left foot was straight on, all right? So that would be an indication that, like, okay, there may be something going on with this right side. Maybe the body's shifting away from something. Maybe that's something I might ask about. Have you had any ankle injuries? So they're just opportunities to explore further, but you can go back to your normal, Jess. So we're looking for that relatively straightforward, okay? Now, again, what kind of information might we find? We saw, for example, maybe we have an asymmetry, that's one thing, but just point both toes out, okay? So as we look, you may find individuals who either maybe they've got some previous ankle injuries, maybe they have some tightness in the calves. Well, there's lots of reasons, even some tightness in the hips. Maybe it might be more comfortable for them to stand with this kind of toed out position. Okay, now not uncommon for a lot of people. And for a lot of individuals, somewhere straight on to like 10 degrees out, no big deal, that's pretty natural. But if someone was, even how Jess is right now, that's gonna be something that I'm at least gonna take note of. It doesn't mean anything right away, but it's something I'm gonna look for. And this is a great example. If you see this, for instance, in the static postural assessment, that's gonna be something you're gonna wanna look for when we get into the overhead squat. And you guys can check out the link in the description of this video for some in-depth information on the overhead squat, but I'll be looking for that same thing. If we see it here and we see those toes turn out in the overhead squat, now it starts to mean something to us too, because we've seen it show up in multiple places. But this just may have an impact on certain exercises. For example, if this is someone's natural position, then we know this externally rotated, because this rotation and it's happening up in the hips. Externally rotated hips, if that's more of a natural position for her, then we know as we get into certain exercises, especially exercises like squats, that may become a challenge, right? It may either limit our position, our squat depth, maybe it has to do with the knee valgus that we'll find in our other assessments. Again, this alone doesn't mean anything, but it's gonna be at least something that I take note of and I look for as we move into other things, okay? So let's go ahead and go feet back forward again. Aside from direction of our toes, maybe give us some information about the ankles and the hips. What we're also looking for is whether or not we have what we would consider to be like a normal healthy arch in the foot. Like right now, I'm able to kind of get my finger right underneath the inside of Jess's foot. So she has that natural arch. What we're looking for individuals that may become a challenge is if we have somewhat of like a collapsed arch, like the foot kind of collapses and rolls in. And as you can see, even as Jess slightly did that, the reason that's important is because with this kinetic chain checkpoint, if we have changes in this position, it's going to impact everything further up. So roll those feet in a little bit again, and right away you can see the knees kind of travel in. Okay, so this will be part of, and go back to our normal. You guys can, again, refer to the link in the descriptions for more information on what we call pes planus syndrome. I know it's kind of a funny word. I don't know who named it, but it is what it is. It has to do with the pes planus, which is this collapsing of the arch because this is really important. The stable tripod foot is really important for stability and for us to track normally at the knee. If we have collapsing of those arches, it's going to be very hard for us to keep normal alignment at the knee. So oftentimes you'll see that collapsed arch and the knees caving in and those hips being kind of internally rotated and adducted. So from the front side, those are some major things we're looking for. First, what's going on at the foot and the ankle? Are there any things that really stick out to us? And then from there too, is there any asymmetries? Outside of that, that's probably going to dictate what's going on at the knees. Are those knees traveling? Are they staying right over the top of this ankle, or are they in or out? Probably going to be related to that pes planus syndrome. And then moving up from there, you always can't see great things, I think, from the anterior view at the hips. Inside of your NASM textbook, they'll talk about, is there a hip hike one way or the other? I think we'll see a better view from the posterior side with that, but it could be something. Does anything stick out about the alignment of the hips? Outside of that, there's not too much else you can see from the front side relative to that LPHC. So what we do now is we move up to the shoulders. Now from the front view, you might not see as much about what's going on with the shoulder position, but I'll give you guys one cheat as I have my handy dandy colored markers here. Hopefully you guys can see these in the video. Now in a perfect world, and I'm gonna try to have Jess just relax and not think about it, just hold these in your hands, just like that, and just stand next to your side. All right, and squeeze them, there you go. Got it, just like that. All right, so she's pretty good here. You guys can see in a healthy shoulder position, meaning not externally or too internally rotated, those pens or those markers would point pretty much directly forward. And for her, they are, all right? They're pointing forward. Now, go ahead and rotate those pens in a little bit. Now, if you were to throw two pens in someone's hand and you see those markers, you know, if there was lines extended out, they'd cross in front, that would be an indication of this internal rotation that's happening mostly here at the shoulder. Now again, you can't see a lot until we get to the lateral view, but this will give us a good indication of what's going on internal or external rotation. I'm gonna steal your markers back. And the reason that this matters is not only because we're gonna be conscious of our shoulder position, and that should be this nice natural place, but here's the application piece of it. So let's say, for example, Jess is pretty internally rotated. You know, we can see the front of her hands as we're in the static postural position. That's pretty, you know, over-exaggerated internal rotation of the shoulder. Now let's say we go into our workouts and I have Jess do a shoulder press. Go ahead and put those hands up in like a field goal position. And I have her shoulder pressing from this position. Well, what I just did is I took someone who's got this internally rotated position, I put her into a stretched external rotation and now loading her with the weight in the exercise. So this information, just to give you an example, it just helps us also select better exercises. So I can already know that if I see that with Jess, well, hey, as we start doing overhead pressing, probably a better, more natural shoulder position for her is gonna be something a little bit more neutral because she's already tight in those areas. So just to give you guys some idea of like, what do we actually do with this? How might we actually use it? And we'll go hands back down to the side. Outside of that, those are the main things that I'm usually looking for from the anterior, right? What's going on foot at the ankle? Do we get any exaggeration of that pes planus syndrome where we have the collapsing of the feet and the arches and the knees caving in? You can see some height level of the hips and the shoulders, potentially if there's any gross exaggerations. For most people, it's not gonna be that large. And then when it comes to the head and the shoulders, everything generally, you know, hopefully just looking for this natural alignment. Outside of that, the other checkpoints, we'll see a lot more once we move on to that lateral view. So once we've covered that anterior view, we'll move to the lateral view. And this is where we're gonna see a little bit more information, especially on the lower and the upper cross syndrome that the NASM texts refer to. So first off, we start with our same 5 kinetic chain checkpoints. Just from an overall perspective, we're looking at alignment, okay? Because obviously we're gonna break down different segments, but we wanna see the bigger picture first. So just like we talked about that straight line from the front side, in a perfect world, there would be this string hanging from the ceiling. And that string or that line would go directly almost through the jaw line, the shoulder, the hip, the knee, and what we call this malleolus of the ankle. Okay, so for one, we're just looking to see, is there any big discrepancy somewhere in that optimal alignment? And you guys can see from your angle, we look pretty good here with Jess, but that's just gonna give you the bigger picture, and then we can look at each piece individually. So foot and the ankle, for the most part, we're just looking at, do we see? Because again, we can't see much as far as what's going on with the front side. We saw that in the anterior view, but more so, is there a relative 90-degree angle here from the foot to the shin bone? I mean, that just may be more so where people naturally distribute their weight. This is one that I find not to be as common for people to see anything that's really gonna stick out to you. But that would be our first place, looking at the foot and the ankle, then knee, Again, from the lateral view, going to be hard to see any big abnormalities. What you may see sometimes though, especially if someone may be what we call like hypermobile, you might know it as double jointed, although that's not really a thing. Just hypermobile, you may be able to see that leg kind of locked out even further. You know, again, just may give us some indication of exercises we do and don't do. And then the real magic here with the lateral view is going to happen once we get to this LPHC. So if you don't mind taking this arm, just cross it over your shoulder so it's out of the way. It's seeing what's happening here with our hip position. Now we have this natural curvature. Let's see if we can match it up. Oh, boom, look at that. Life size, this is perfect. I'm pretty sure this is a female pelvis too. But we have this natural curvature of the spine. What we're looking for is big, what we call gross exaggerations. Big extreme, because we have a natural lordosis and kyphosis. But as we look at lower and upper cross syndromes, we're just looking for exaggeration of those things. And the first thing that we'll notice is gonna be that natural tilt of our pelvis. And so we're really just looking to see, is there a small natural curvature of the low back, or do we have, and you can, if you can perform it too, try to arch that back even more. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, just like that. What we call like an anterior curvature of the spine. Okay. Now again, on its own might not mean anything, but once we get into the other assessments, this may show up in the overhead squat, all right, and the push-pull assessment in the same ways, because the idea is that, you know, this may just be how someone's naturally normally used to being, or maybe there's some congenital things, they're born with a certain bone structure. We're not going to change those, but it is going to give us some indication as we get into our movement assessments of areas that we may need to focus on watching and strengthening as we go along, okay? So especially with all the muscles that attach to the hips here, you know, it could be low back muscles pulling us up into a position, could be hip flexors pulling down. We're not gonna know just from the static postural assessment. We'll get more information as we move into more of our movement assessments. So you can go back to your natural position here, all right? So that's the first area. Looking, do we see any what we call lordosis, right? This excessive lumbar curvature. And then we move up into kind of our mid and upper back. Now from this side, again, we have our natural kyphosis of the spine here at our thoracic spine, but just give me like an exaggerated rounding of your shoulders here. Okay, as we try to make more extreme versions of what we're looking for, we're trying to look and see, do we have any big over-exaggerated curvature of this T-spine, as well as position of the shoulders? So you can stand back up for me. This is just gonna give us some good indication. First, like we talked about from the anterior, we may have seen some rotation of the arms here. And then on the front side, what we're looking for is, are the shoulders rounded out? Do we have this protraction of the shoulder blade? And when it comes to the details of our upper cross and our lower cross syndrome, again, we have other videos that break those down more specifically, the muscles that might be overactive and underactive. But static postural, we're just looking for it. Because this is another great example where if I find someone who's pretty rounded here, shoulders are forward, well, even doing so, Jess, as you kind of round those shoulders forward, try to take your left arm and just bring it up overhead. Yeah, just straight up overhead. Yeah, and bring it back down. So this is why this matters, or this is how we can use a static postural assessment. If we see a lot of that here, well, right away I can tell you for someone who's got that big T-spine, rounding and shoulder, it's gonna be hard for them to get in a good overhead position. So that's kind of the practical application of what do we do with this information? Well, we'll kind of do some shoulder assessments afterwards to see if there's anything going on here as well. And then the last thing that we really see from this lateral portion is just position of the head and neck. So if we kind of push the head out a little bit, do we see that little like Tex neck, right? Like a little turtle head poking out? You know, oftentimes we live in a society that is very anterior dominant, right? A lot of people are working at computers, heads, and cell phones. So this just may also relate to a lot of like tension in the neck and shoulders. And that would even be a question that I would ask somebody if I see that, is like, hey, do you ever get any like neck or shoulder issues, any tension headaches? Because oftentimes it can be overactivity in some of these muscles like our levator scapulae, our sternocleidomastoid, all those things that may relate to it as well. So overall, looking from the anterior side, we get a better lateral view here of what's going on at our LPHC, especially coming up into the T-spine and also the head. And the last of our three views we're going to take a look at is the posterior view. And the benefit of this is I find the posterior view is the best place to identify any little asymmetries or shifts that we just weren't able to see from the front side, or maybe we were distracted by other things that were going on as we were looking at the feet. So first, we want to start with our same checkpoints. We start at the ground, work our way up, and we're looking, again, is there that imaginary line right equidistant in between those feet working its way up? And if there was, do we see anything that shifted one way or the other. And you can see it's very slight with Jess, but there's a little bit of a shift of the body over to this side. So if you guys really take a look, take a second, pay attention to the video, the foot position is good, but as we start to work our way up, her body has kind of shifted off to that side to over exaggerate it, which, as I've gotten to know Jess, we got some things going on. So, you know, your body is great at working around whatever you have going on, and it just may result in those types of things. So that would just be something I would note. I'd say, okay, cool, well, our body's really stacked up over that right hip more so than it is the left. Doesn't mean anything on its own, but I'm gonna pay attention to it. But we see foot and ankle position looks pretty good. Knees look pretty good as well. This would be another great place if, Jess, do you mind collapsing those feet in a little bit again? Yeah, well, if you didn't see it well before, you'll just see the same thing going on with the knees here as well. So you'll get a good view. If we have that pes planus syndrome going on, you can go back normal. And then moving our way up from the knees up to the hips. This is one where sometimes it can even be helpful. And again, this is the benefit of having like some tighter fitting athletic clothing, is to actually kind of palpate and find, you know, like where the hip bones are. Again, we're not physical therapists, we're not chiropractors, you know, but just to have an idea, is there a big exaggeration on one side versus the next? Or even if you just take a dowel or like a broomstick and put it across the hip bones, it'll give you an idea of, do we see like a big shift one way versus the other? Once again, not something that I may fix, but definitely something I may want to know so I can work around with the right exercises. The other thing you can also see from the backside pretty well is what's going on with the shoulder blades. So we talked about from that anterior and the lateral view, the issues that may happen at the shoulders, especially if their shoulders, you round their shoulders, they're rounded forward. This just may give me an indication of what's going on with our scapula. You can stand back up normal. And then also Jess is, I mean, she's got good shoulder position here as well. Sometimes you'll see that shoulder blade really kind of jutting out, what we call like a winged scapula. And from the posterior view is probably gonna be the best place that you see it. And then outside of that, moving shoulders and neck, you might just again be able to see, is there any big discrepancy or asymmetry between height of the shoulders? Oftentimes that may be tied into something from the neck or the shoulders and hips, you know, or the hip further down. And then also just head alignment. So outside of that, I find again, from the posterior view, probably the most beneficial place to find those little asymmetries as we see here, because sometimes they can be more challenging to pick up from your other angles. So we could spend more time with every aspect of the static postural assessments and really getting down into all the details, and they're all important, but just a reminder for you guys, as you go through the anterior, the lateral, and the posterior views, you really just want to look at the big picture. We definitely want to take notes on some of the things that we might find, but we're really just looking for, are there any big issues that might impact the exercises that we choose? Or are there any things that as I do the other assessments, as I do my overhead squat, I do my single leg squat, my push-pull assessments, that continue to come back up? Because most times one assessment in and of itself might not be the most beneficial, but utilizing each of these different static postural and movement assessments can give us great information about how our clients move. So keep in mind those 5 major checkpoints for each of your different views, and you guys are gonna have clients getting a lot more out of their training sessions and obviously hopefully passing your NASM exam.